Gary Neal again here, and in this video I want to cover the NLP Meta Model. Now this is really useful tool for you to learn, whether you're a communicator or whether you're a therapist. Knowing the Meta Model will really help you in being able to retrieve really useful bits of information that you can use to help your clients, and it can help you to communicate more effectively and get better understanding when you're talking to anyone in general. And the reason being for this is that many people, what they say and what you understand are not necessarily the same thing, and a lot of confusion can happen because what happens is someone will say something, and quite often for us to understand it, we have to mind read what that person means because there are gaps in the information. And the NLP Meta Model originally was written up in the book The Structure of Magic by Richard Bandler and Grinder, and it came from the original work that they did where Richard and someone called Frank were originally working in Gestalt therapy, and they were really good at doing it, but they didn't necessarily know how they were doing it. And they went to Grinder, and what he did, he was a linguist, and he started unpacking linguistically what they were doing. And so a lot of the linguistic patterns from the Meta Model were modeled from Fritz, Perls and Virginia Satir. And what they found was that they could get change by becoming more and more specific in their language, and getting the clients to become more specific in what they were, how they were representing it. And so from our point of view, there are two main uses for the Meta Model. First main use is to gather information. Now, this is really useful, definitely from the point of view of therapy. When someone comes in, you want to start gathering information, not necessarily content. We want to start understanding the context and the process and the structure. What is happening below the surface as such, and how a person is doing in the problem. What internal representations are they making? How are they thinking? In what context does this thing happen? What are the triggers? The NLP Meta Model gives you precision in being able to gather that information. The other main use of the Meta Model is to expand the person's model of the world. A client will come in with a model of the world. In other words, how they represent things in the world. And quite often it will be very limited because that's why they're stuck in the problem. What you can do with the Meta Model is start to expand their model of the world. And quite often, just by doing that, and no special techniques, no hypnosis, you can create change. So those are the two main uses of the Meta Model that we'll be using and uncovering. Now, this is only going to be a short video. I highly recommend that if you are really interested in the Meta Model, you either read The Structure of Magic, volumes 1 and 2. Now, I warn you in advance, they're a little bit heavy going. Alternatively, read The Magic of NLP Demystified by Byron Lewis and Frank Pichelik. Really useful book, gives a much simpler explanation of the Meta Model and how to use it. So let's look at how it works. In the Meta Model, it presupposes something in NLP, there's something called the universal modeling process. What that means is that at any point in time, we have been bombarded with millions of bits of information. Depending on what expert you might want to refer to, we could be bombarded by about 2.3 or 2.6 million bits of information at any one time. Now, that is far more than we can consciously comprehend and we can consciously pay attention to. So we filter all that information down to, again, depending on what expert you listen to, 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information or chunks of information. And so what basically that's happening, you imagine if you've got over here 2.3 million matchsticks, and over here you've got a hand that can only catch 7 plus or minus 2, and constantly this is happening. 2.3 million bits of information are coming along, and you can only catch and pay attention to 7 plus or minus 2. So there's a huge amount of information that is either deleted, distorted, or generalized so that we can make sense of the world, and that we don't have to constantly keep learning new things, that we can generalize information, we can delete loads of stuff, and we can distort things so that we can understand the world and don't have to keep learning everything over and over again as new. So the 3 main modeling processes are deletions, distortions, and generalizations. So let's first look at the deletions. First class of deletions are something called normalizations. Now these are typically verbs or action words that have been frozen and turned into nouns. So how this will work in therapy, you'll hear this all the time, things like stress, a decision, a relationship, or relating, respect, communication. All these things, they sound like nouns. Like respect sounds like a noun. Communication sounds like a noun. Stress sounds like a noun. Even things like depression sounds like a noun. But the reality is they're actually processes. But what's happened is with your language, we've frozen that down into a noun. And what we need to do as therapists is to denormalize it. In other words, take it back into a process. So that people, first of all, that they realize that they are actually doing it. So for example, if someone says, I'm stressed, it sounds like that they got this thing called stress. But what we want to do is we want to get them to understand that they are stressing themselves. So the challenge for any normalization is how are you, and then you add ing on the end in a lot of cases. So how are you stressing yourself? How are you doing that? How are you stressing yourself? If it's about communication, someone might say, talking about their relationship, we're just not communicating. How are you not communicating now? How about someone makes a decision? Well, I've made my decision. Well, how are you deciding? So you've taken this frozen bit in time and you start expanding it back out into a process. So the first class of deletions is normalizations, and the challenge is how are you blank ing now? So what I want you to do is to start looking at normalizations, and the test for a normalization is if it's a noun, you can put it in a wheelbarrow and you can move it around. But if it sounds like a noun, but you can't put it in a wheelbarrow, that means it's a normalization. And then your job, therefore, is to denormalize it and turn it back into a process, because then we can work with it. So my challenge for you is to write down at least 20 different normalizations from words like stress, depression, communication, relationship, all sorts of words like that. One of the keys for them is you hear I-O-N at the end of it. That's a kind of tip-off for a normalization. And then denormalize it. How are you Xing now? So that would be the challenge, to start moving it back into a process. Then class 2 is what they call unspecified verbs. Now these are process words that are lacking a complete description. So for example, someone might come in and say, he screwed up. Now, it sounds like you've got some information there, but have you really? Do you know how he screwed up? You don't, do you? You have no clue at all. He hurt me. Well, how did he hurt you? Did he smack you around the head with a baseball bat, or did he tread on your foot? We need to gather some more information there. Another example of that would be, he pisses me off. He really fucks me off. Well, how? Sounds a bit like Life of Brian, but here you go. So these are process words that are lacking complete description. So how you gather more information at that point is, How specifically did he piss you off? How specifically did he hurt you? How specifically did he screw up? And then what you're doing is you're starting to unravel and you're starting to expand the model of the world. You're getting more useful information and you're also starting to expand their model of the world. Then we have, next class, is simple deletions. Now these are nouns lacking complete description. So for example, I might say some of the information here that you're going to learn in this video is going to be really useful for you. I haven't given you all the information. Like what information? How is it going to be useful? So the challenge is when you hear simple deletions is who, what, when, where specifically. So whenever someone says something like, I need some clarity. You need some more information there. How specifically do you need it? When do you need it? What specifically do you mean clarity? So you're getting more information. So again, what this will do is start to expand their model of the world, because a lot of times people's problems will be locked in to their way of thinking, and it's pretty rigid. When you start expanding it, the problem starts loosening up. Now, it doesn't mean that necessarily you are going to cure the problem, but what you're going to start doing is start putting cracks in it, and then it becomes really loose. Then the fourth class of deletions are something called lost performatives. Who comes up with these words? Now these are, lost performatives are where the source of the statement is not mentioned. So for example, someone might say, that's stupid, that's ridiculous, it's just not done that way. And the challenge for that is, well, who says? According to whom? So what you're doing there is, again, because a lot of people will use these types of words without really thinking, but they'll box themselves into a corner with them. So by challenging them, they'll say, well, who says that's stupid? Who says it's not important? According to whom? If someone says, it's always done this way, well, according to whom? Who says it's always done this way? So you're gathering information and you're expanding the model of the world. I hope that makes sense. So that's deletions. The next class of modelling is the distortions. Now, these are often the big ones, and certainly the ones that you'll see most often as causes of problems. And the first class is what's called cause and effect statements, where X causes Y. So you get some X causes Y. And probably 95% of the problems that you'll see in your therapy practice are going to be what are called cause and effect violations, where the person perceives that there's some outside cause that makes them feel a certain way. And one of our jobs, obviously, is to first of all get them to break that, but also to get them to understand that they are the ones who are actually at cause. So we don't actually, it's not a good idea to actually say to the person, don't you realise you're at cause for this? That tends not to work, don't try that. I have, it didn't end well. So typically the tip-offs for cause and effects will be when X happens, client does Y, or if X, then Y, or A makes B. And so the challenge then is you say to them, well, how does X cause Y? How do you do that? How does that happen? And how do you do it? How does X cause Y? What you're doing then is really challenging that thing. So, he makes me so angry. Well, how does he make you so angry? How does he do that? And then you're gathering more information. You're beginning to challenge what they're saying, but from our point of view, from the NLP point of view, you're gathering more information, because what we're looking for are all the non-verbals. So we're looking for all the eye patterns, we're watching where their eyes go, we're watching the change in breathing, because when we're working at this level with the cause and effects, and quite sometimes the complex equivalence, which we'll talk about in a minute, we're looking for the triggers. So this is where you need to really pay attention to your client, to all the non-verbal cues, the pauses, the breaths, the eye patterns. This is where we want to be paying attention to. So how does he do that? How does it make you do that? So we're looking for that. So what I want you to do, a challenge for you, is to start writing, do at least 20, write out 20 cause and effect statements that could be linked with the type of clients that you work with. So if you're working with weight loss clients, you might go down one route. If you're working with anxiety clients, when I speak to my boss, I feel anxious, those sorts of things. Then create challenges, because the only way you're really going to learn this, if you just listen to this video and then go away and think, yep, I know the meta model. Well, you may know it intellectually, but it's not going to be hardwired in. So you need to practice. So I would suggest at first, write out 20 of these, what are called meta model violations of cause and effect, and then your challenges to them, and begin to wire it in. When I did one of my master practitioners with Richard Bandler, he made us write out 100 of all these different types of things. And certainly when we got to the Milton model, we had to write out 100 of all the different types of presuppositions, so that it would literally get wired in. So the more you do this, the more you practice it, the more it will become there when you need it. So then we have complex equivalence. This is where A equals B. So clients are equating two things. So an example might be, he just sits there watching TV. That means he doesn't love me. Does it really mean that? But in their head, that's what they've linked up. She doesn't pay attention to me anymore. That means she just doesn't care. So again, we need to be breaking this down and looking at this. So typically it can be indicated by the verb to be. So the challenges for complex equivalence is, well, have you ever A and not B? So for example, have you ever watched TV and not loved your girlfriend? Have you ever watched the TV and loved your girlfriend? Is that possible? Well, yeah, I suppose it is. Then what you can do is you can flip it around the other way to get counter examples. Have you ever loved your girlfriend and not watched TV? Now, there's a firing order to problems. We tend to forget, or we perhaps don't even are aware, that a lot of times problems are held together linguistically. And there is a firing order of this, and this problem. Now, if you reverse the firing order, it don't fire no more. So counterexamples are one of the most useful things that you can understand and utilize when you're creating change work conversationally. Everyone wants to learn these really flash language patterns. You don't really need them. All you need to do is to get either the cause and effect or the complex equivalence, and quite often just flip the firing order around and reverse the firing order, and that can create a tremendous amount of change. So what I want you to do is I want you to, again, write down 20 examples of complex equivalences where A equals B, and then, first of all, write the question down, have you ever A and not B? And then, have you ever B and not A, to get the counter examples? Because this will really loosen things up. So an example of this with, let's say for example, someone has anxiety, and you say, well, how do you know you have anxiety? And they say, well, because my heart rate really increases and my stomach starts to churn. Okay, so you could say to them, okay, so that you've got a complex equivalence there. Anxiety equals heart rate increasing and stomach churning. Yeah. So have you ever had anxiety and not had your heart rate beating and your stomach churning? Again, it's challenging. And they may say, well, no. Or they may say yes. You're trying to break that connection. But then what you do is flip it around the other way. Have you ever had your heart rate and beating faster and your stomach churning and you've not had anxiety, like maybe in a good way? I mean, have you ever had your heart rate beating and your stomach churning when you've had sex? Again, you're flipping it. So one doesn't mean the other. And you can use this in so many different ways. So getting counterexamples of when is this not true and flipping it around the other way is a really useful maneuver to start breaking them out of their model of the world. Then in distortions, we have mind reading. Now, mind reading is claiming to know the thoughts of other people. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is rather complicated. Wouldn't it be nice if it was easier? And so what we're doing is, you'll hear people say this all the time. You'll say, I just know he doesn't love me. How do you know? So the answer for any mind reading is, how do you know? You're challenging that mind read. And certainly in relationships, one of the biggest issues is the two people mind reading the other's intention. And I don't want to be overly sexist in this, but if you do the research, women are really, really good at this. That they will often, in a situation, mind read what the other person's thinking, and then that becomes true. So an example of that might be, let's say a woman is single, and she works with some other people there, and there's a guy that she really is attracted to, and she sees him over by the photocopier, and she walks up to him and says, would you like to come to lunch with me today? And he says no. Now, quite often what will happen is the person will be thinking, he doesn't like me. Maybe he's got a girlfriend. Maybe I'm really ugly. And it could just be he's busy with something else. He's working during his lunchtime. But straight away the person has mind read the intention. And this is really, really common in relationships. And it causes so many issues. So whenever you're working with someone and you hear a mind read, the challenge is, well, how do you know? And then you're getting it back into the deeper structure of what is really going on. How are they really thinking? What are they representing in their head? So this is what we want to be doing. And then the third class of this is of the general modelling math's not working, of the modelling process is generalizations. And these first class are what are called modal operators. Again, who comes up with this language? Modal operators are verbs which presuppose or not choice. And we can have modal operators of possibility, and which are things, words like I can do this, I will do this, and there are also words of impossibility. I can't, I won't. So what we need to do is, whenever we hear words like, typically in a therapy scenario, you're going to hear the words I can't. I can't do this, I can't lose weight, I can't stop smoking, I can't walk up to someone and ask them for a drink, I can't do this, I can't do that. The question that you then challenge them with is, well, what prevents you? And if you ask the question, then you're going to get back to the cause and effect. What prevents you? Oh, X happens. Oh, so when X happens, that means this. Yes. So you're getting then the cause and effect. Then you can track back, and you're going to be looking for then the trigger or the synesthesia, which triggers the bad feeling. Another question you could ask, which expands the model of the world, well, what would happen if you did? Because remember, they've got this model of the world that's nicely formed, and when they say they can't, that means there is nothing outside of that. If you then say, well, what would happen if you did? The only way they can answer that question is to step out of their model of the world to answer it and to get a new perspective. And then you can lead them on. So what would happen if you did? Well, I'd feel so much better if I could do that. Oh, and how would you feel if you felt so much better? Well, I'd feel fantastic. Well, how does it feel when you feel fantastic? Well, it just feels so good. You've got a resource. So you've expanded them out of their model of the world. And if you know the languaging, you can then take that state and apply it back onto the problem scenario. And that will again loosen their grip on the problem. So then we have modal operators of necessity. Now these are verbs which presuppose a requirement. So for example, these are words like I have to, I should, I must. So what I'd like you to do, again, is to write out some examples of this that you have regularly come up with your types of clients. Because then the question would be, well, what would happen if you didn't? So again, it's expanding their model of the world. Because in their model of the world, things have to be this way. For them to answer the question, well, what would happen if you didn't? They have to step out of the model of the world. Once they step out of the model of the world, you can then start accessing resources which they don't have access to when they're in this model of the world. So the challenge for modal operators of necessity would be, what would happen if you didn't? Then this last category is universal quantifiers. Now these can be nouns or adjectives or adverbs which presuppose total inclusion or exclusion. And the tip-off words you'll hear is things like never, always, everyone. So this always happens. He always does this. He never does the washing up. He never tidies up. I can't imagine where I'm getting these words from. The challenge for that is always, then what? Never. He never does that. He always does that. What? Everyone thinks that way. So you're challenging the generalization. So you're challenging this universal quantifier. So those are the main parts of the meta model. Now, I understand it's kind of complicated, but it's the foundation of everything in NLP. And a lot of times you get some of these short NLP courses, or you get NLP included in hypnosis training, and all they're doing is giving you a bunch of techniques. That's not NLP. That's just a bunch of techniques. NLP is the meta model and how you use it. It's about gathering information. It's the foundation of everything that Richard Bandler does. So it's extremely useful. There are 3 versions of the meta model. There's the first meta model, which is featured in The Structure of Magic and what we're talking about here, and in the Magic of NLP Demystified. Then there's meta model 2, which is John Grinder's version that you might have heard if you've studied Tony Robbins, which is called the precision model, and he uses sort of memorizes it on the fingers. That's meta model 2. Meta model 3 is really about the work of Christina Hall. If you don't know who Christina Hall is, she's a fantastic NLP trainer, and she's known even by Richard as the wordsmith of NLP. And some NLP trainings will give you a one-page handout on the Meta Model 3, and it's a series of questions that directionalize the person's thinking. Well, that's such a small example of what Christina does. Christina's version of the Meta Model is using questions to directionalize the person's thinking and to get them to use resources, break out of their limitations, and she does some incredible work. If you ever get the chance to work with her and go and train with her, do it. It's a really eye-opening experience. So, as I say, I understand this is kind of complicated, but there is a general purpose challenge that will pretty much gather as much information as you need that you can use without necessarily memorizing everything that we've covered. You don't need to know, remember what a loss performative is. You don't necessarily need to know what a modal operator of necessity is, because most of the issues that come up can be challenged with the question, how do you know? And what happens then is that you're going to get, if you're paying attention, if you're using your sensory acuity, you are going to get the key information that you need. You're going to be able to challenge their limitations and their generalizations, their distortions, and begin to break their model of the world and put cracks in it by just using the word, how do you know? What that does, it will get into greater levels of specificity, you'll get the eye patterns, you'll get the synesthesia, you'll hear all the predicates, and you'll be able to make those changes. So that's my quick overview of the meta model. It is a quick overview. I would normally spend, if I was doing a training on this, at least a day training on the meta model, because there is a lot to learn. But I suggest that you write down at least 20 examples of each category and use the questions so that you can begin to challenge those whenever you hear them in real life. Now, word of warning. A lot of times when people learn the meta model, they become what's known in NLP terms as meta monsters. And they go out challenging every deletion, every distortion, every generalization. And they annoy the crap out of people. Be careful, use it judiciously, and it will pay dividends. It is a very, very, very useful tool. If you just learned that, you'll be light years ahead of many of the other therapists out there, because these questions provide you key information and will help break the client out of their model of the world and begin to create change. So once again, if you have any questions, by all means, get in contact with me, either on my website or my Facebook page, or even on YouTube. Until the next time, I'll see you soon.